Welcome to Miata University, and today we're going to be looping the lines on a 95 Mazda Miata. This is kind of a stopgap situation that's leaking power steering fluid, so the owner wants to just go ahead and loop the lines and eliminate the power steering until we do some other things. So we're going to get started. First thing we have to do is take off the intake tube. I'm going to start that right here. The tricky one is this one right here. Put some pliers in there, send the hose clamp down, and push it down. Loosen this one just a little bit more. And it's out. Okay, now we're going to take off the stock air box, if you still have a stock air box. There's some 12mm bolts. We're going to take those off. If you're looking for a good storage place, the window cowl is a good place for it. Little top tip here, always keep your hardware together so you're not chasing bolts all over the place. If I get into a big project, I'll often get like old Tupperware tubs, butter tubs, whatever you can use, even the little magnetic trays that you can get, just to keep everything organized. Now we're going to switch to a 10mm socket. Okay, so you're going to need a 10mm socket, and we're going to loosen the intake tube. And there's one more place we need to loosen, and that's this hose clamp in the back of the air box that the intake tube connects to. That one we're going to need a screwdriver. Alright, and here we go. I'm going to go and loosen this clamp in the back. You've got to separate these two. Now in the case of what we're doing, this isn't going to really be in the way, so I'm not even going to take that off. You do need to disconnect the connector. And you got this wire hooked up to this, and a lot of people have a tendency to just pull it and they'll break it. But if you look underneath here, you can just take a pair of pliers, you can squeeze that and pop it right out. And that way you can plug it back in and you haven't broken the connector. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the power steering / AC belt. So there's some connectors right here we're going to loosen. Make sure you do your righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Doesn't have to come all the way out, you just want to make sure that they're loose. Oh, we got a zip tie here. Okay, so this area you're going to use a combination of 14s and 12s. So just have those two out, and that should be enough for you to loosen what's going on here. Now there is one tricky one, and there's one inside the pulley here. Now, in order to get to that, you notice that we can't get to it from the front because the slot's not lined up. There's a simple way you can fix that though. What you're going to do is you're going to put the engine in neutral, or the transmission in neutral, and we're going to turn this crank gear so that way we can get this lined up to where we need it to be. Okay, so now you can see we can actually get there with the socket. It's another 14, but there's also a bolt on the other side here. So if you start turning this one without holding this bolt, you're just going to be spinning. So we're going to want to hold that loose, or hold that. And this is your pivot bolt for your power steering pump. So now you can start loosening this, and it'll start taking the slack off the belt. So for good measure, just take a little push. And now, almost, we can get that belt off. Now we can take the belt off. Get it out from underneath the AC, and it's off. Now this car has been running pretty dry on power steering fluid, but if you're taking it off a non-leaking system, you're going to want to remove the fluid. Now you can take one of the lines loose and make a big mess, or you can go in here and remove some of the fluid with a syringe and rubber hose. You just come in there and suck the fluid out. I don't know if we're going to get any. Yep. So as you can see here, we got quite a bit of fluid still left in there that would have just dripped out when we were done, when we didn't want it to. Here's another top tip. So we haven't taken this power steering pump off its bracket yet. We're going to go and break these bolts loose. We may or may not need to take them off right away, but when the pump is loose, it's going to be real hard to break those loose. So we're just going to go ahead and break them loose now while everything's still tied down. Okay, now that everything's loosened, we need to take this bolt out, and we need to take the bolt that goes through the pump onto the bracket. Another top tip, don't lose bolts, just put them back where they came from after you've taken the part off that you need off. Alright, so we got the nut off the front, and we're going to pull the bolt out the back underneath the header, like so. And put those two together so you don't lose them. At this point, your power steering pump is loose. There is a little connector, just a pressure switch connector. And here's your power steering pump. Okay, now we're going to take out the reservoir, and there's just a couple of bolts holding that in place. That's kind of fun to break loose. Here we have a stuck hose. It's been on there probably since the car was new. It's cracked already. And we're just going to try to break the seal that's been formed over the years loose. Since I'm not reusing this hose, I'm not really too worried about puncturing it. But if you're trying to reuse the hose, that's something to consider. Be careful. So it's kind of dark in there, so we've got a steering rack down here that shows you what a power steering rack looks like that's been slightly modified. This line has not been modified. This line has been cut. So we're going to cut the line, and then we're going to connect a hose to either side and connect those lines, which is why they call it looping the power steering lines. Now this line down here, and I'll show it to you with the light, is right down there. That's the one that we're going to have to cut. And it's probably going to be easier if we remove it first and then cut it rather than try to cut it in place. It's a 17 millimeter and it's a really tight spot. In fact, I'm hoping we don't have to remove the AC compressor. Actually, I have to go down. This is a pain in the butt, man. Alright, to provide a little bit of access, we're going to go ahead and loosen the AC compressor. It's 4 simple bolts, so we can't get to that without this being in the way, so we're going to remove it. Alright, so what we're doing is we're just going ahead and pushing this a little bit out of the way. So hopefully it'll give us the room we need to get in there. And I'm going to get a bungee to kind of hold this up in place. Sort of. So we're going to get this hose clamp off to get the other line. Oops. So we're going to get the hose clamp off to get this other line off. So again, I'm putting a pick in there. Try to break the seal of the hose away from the metal. That's probably been there since the car was new. We're going to remove the power steering cooler line. It's essentially just a long tube. On the early cars, I think it changed to shorter tube on the NB. Anyway, there's a few 10 millimeter bolts, 4 that looks like to be exact, that we're just going to take out. Oh, I'm not using the impact. And the last two are up inside the bumper here. Out of here. So I'm taking the other ends of these hose clamps that are on the power steering line off so we can get those out of the way and pull the rest of the power steering line out. And it's out. Okay, so now we've got the top line and the bottom line down there has been cut. And we're going to go ahead and attach those with the piece of hose. So this power steering system's been leaking for some time, so there's oil all over everything. So we're going to go ahead and use a little bit of brake parts cleaner, spray everything down and clean it. Works really well for cleaning oil and stuff, so that's what we're going to do. Now we're just putting the AC compressor back on. So we're just going to start these bolts. See that everything's much cleaner. Another thing we have to remove is the old power steering bracket, just because it's not needed anymore. And then we're going to be good to go. We'll reattach this ground wire as well. Another little top tip when you're installing a series of bolts like this, 4 of them, get all 4 of them started before you go tightening any of them down. That way if there's any play that needs to be done to get everything lined up, each bolt lined up, you have that play in the system. Now here I'm going to talk to you about tightening bolts. So if you don't know the torque specs, on anything that rotates, or anything like the valve cover where it has to seat in a very uniform fashion, I definitely recommend using the torque specs, and they can be found online. However, something like this AC compressor, I refer to as good and tight. Now what is good and tight? A lot of it depends on the size of the bolt head. This being a 12 millimeter, it's not going to be as crazy as say a 14 or 17 millimeter. You're just going to turn it until it's just really snug. Don't go over torquing it, because that's how you can snap stuff. Now, we are going to remove this power steering bracket. He is going to not be able to run his AC until we get a manual steering bracket. Or excuse me, Mazda on the power steering, or the non-power steering cars, had a tensioner bracket that worked with ACs. There's no way to tension this belt now, so he's going to run without AC for a while until he can find one of those rare as hen's teeth tensioner brackets. When we get one, I'll go ahead and show you how to put that on as well. Okay, so we're putting the AC box back in, and basically it's just everything's reversal of removal. So we're just putting everything back in where it came from. And again, good top tip is to make sure you start all the bolts before tightening any of them. Or sometimes you'll find that last bolt won't line up. This is the line that was going into the power steering pump, no longer needed. We're going to go ahead and zip tie this and just tuck it back here. All right, we're done. So now what we're going to do is test drive it and clean up our tools, put our tools away. Always keep a clean garage so you can find your tools for next time. And that's it.